All right, today we're privileged to interview Captain Brad Israel of the United States Army. We're located in the Fairhope Library in Fairhope, Alabama. The interview is part of the Veterans Historic Project, which is affiliated with the Library of Congress. I'll start by asking you to talk a little bit about your childhood, family, college, and why you joined the Army, and then you can carry on from there. So without further ado, of course, special emphasis on Afghanistan. Without further ado, you can start, Brad. Just
Okay.
talk about your family and where it all started.
All right. Born in Mobile, Alabama, and went to UMS Wright Preparatory School from K4 all the way through 12th grade. I have a older brother, Will, and a younger sister, Susanna. Will lives in Birmingham now, and Susanna's in Mobile. My father was an internist in Mobile. My mom had her hands full with all three of us growing up and running around, causing trouble in Mobile, and just very fortunate to have been born and raised in such a good community. And got involved in sports early on and continued throughout high school, and I think some of that probably helped pave the way for some of the discipline and just the intestinal fortitude that's needed for military service. After I left UMS, I went to Hampton-Sydney College in Farmville, Virginia. My brother was up there. He was a sophomore, and a couple other guys from Mobile as well. So some high school friends. We all kind of went up there, and it was at Hampton-Sydney that when 9/11 happened. I was a sophomore, and as everybody can always remember certain monumental events in their life. For me, that was in a psychology class, and I was also enrolled in a national security class taught by retired Lieutenant General Sam Wilson at the time, and so it was from that moment that kind of changed all of our lives, and he was kind of the person that everybody on campus turned to because he had so much experience from World War II all the way forward, and we held a seminar in the auditorium that night of 9/11, and he kind of addressed the college and explained what was going on and what was about to happen, and kind of tried to put everybody at ease as much as he could, and so that was when I started getting interested in military service, and he kind of was he was a phenomenal teacher, mentor, friend, still is, and he taught a leadership and ethics course at Hampton-Sydney. He taught a U.S. intelligence course at Hampton-Sydney, and gravitated to both of those and really got a lot out of them, and went on to become a member of the Wilson Center for Leadership in the Public Interest, which is kind of the leadership school at Hampton-Sydney, and you take various courses and do internships and have different VIPs, I guess, come in from Washington or people that have been out in the world and have done great things, and they come back to a small remote area in Virginia and they tell you about it. And so it was really what fascinated me and something I found my passion in. And I was not interested in doing ROTC, so the route I chose was, after I graduated college, I went out west for about 4 or 5 months with some friends and worked at a ranch. And I knew that I wanted to go have some fun before coming into the service, and got all my paperwork straight and did the 09 Sierra program, which is civilian to officer. So you go to basic training, and then you go to the officer candidate school at Fort Benning. So that was the route that entered me into the service. I was commissioned as an infantry officer in August of 2005, and went to the infantry officer basic course following that, and then on to Ranger School and Airborne School. And my first assignment was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team in Vicenza, Italy. I reported over there in September of 2006, and was assigned to 1st Battalion, 503rd Airborne Infantry. I was with Charlie Company, and we hit the ground running. It was that time to start getting prepped for the next rotation. The 173rd had just gotten back from Afghanistan, and we were originally templated to go to Iraq, to Kirkuk. So we started getting familiar with that area and training up for a mission to Iraq. And it was, I guess, early 2007. I believe it was January. We got a mission change to go back to Afghanistan, for the unit to go back to Afghanistan. It was my first rotation over there. And so we shifted our gears and revamped our training, and luckily we had a lot of continuity with the non-commissioned officers who had just been over there and gotten back, and we were headed to RC East to Paktika, and most of them had served in Paktika, so we were lucky in that regard. And we went up to Germany for about a month and a half, to Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, and we did our pre-mission train up there, and came back to Italy, and we shipped our equipment out, and I left with the Advon, the advance party, to go over there and start getting ready to receive all the guys from our company. So I guess that kind of takes me from childhood to Afghanistan.
Is there any different preparation for going to Iraq than Afghanistan? Is the training any different?
It is.
Because of the terrain or something?
It is, exactly. I mean, the terrain is I guess, more unforgiving in Afghanistan. You know, where we were, I mean, it's, you know, you can be up at 10,000 feet. You're in remote areas. They've got the mud culottes. I have not been to Iraq, but from what I understand, it's much more advanced with just, you know, urban, you know, cities, whereas we're looking at villages. I mean, if you even want to call it that. I mean, some areas you're just talking 5 or 6 mud little compounds, and that's it. And then other areas, you know, they had some larger infrastructure development, but it was still, I mean, it was, you know, I think the way we described it when we first got there is, if you wanted to step back into biblical times, you'd go to Afghanistan, because I mean, no roads, no electricity, no running water, just very, very primitive living. So it was certainly different preparation, because we kind of scaled down from urban operations and, you know, how you're going to do crowd control and things like that, and it was more, you know, how you're going to get into the mountains and get access to these areas, and how you're going to relate to these people. I mean, it was, you know, different languages as well. I mean, in Afghanistan where we were, they speak Pashto and Urdu, and where we were training for Iraq, it was Arabic for the most part. So it was very, very different in that regard.
Did you have some language training, or?
We did. You do some cultural training and some very, you know, basic introductory, you know, training on the language. I was fortunate to have some outstanding interpreters while I was there. So, you know, that's almost an extension of you when you're trying to convey your message to the people in those areas. But it's important. I mean, I think that for a counterinsurgency type fight, I mean, that's the most important thing. Is it's all about the relationships. It's, you know, how you can relate to those people, and if they're going to buy in and believe what you're telling them. And if you know, if you disrespect their culture or you shun them in any way, then I mean, you know, these people may not be educated, but they're survivors. I mean, they've been able to grow white beards because they've been able to stay alive that long, not because, you know, they've got doctors and everything else to take care of them. So you have to respect that and understand that they're sharp with human mapping and human reading. I mean, they can pick up body language and tone just as well as, you know, our most educated can. So
Understand that some of their history is done by word or by poetry or something like that, rather than books when you get into the deeper part of Afghanistan. I looked at the map, and it looks like it's quite a lot of mountains, and where you were in Paktika.
In Paktika province. It was. I mean, there's some flat areas as well, but for the most part, you know, we were in the mountains. The area called Gamal, which it's a district, the largest district in Paktika. that was kind of, it was both. I mean, you had some flat, just brown, tabletop areas, and then you had your very rugged, only dismounted movement to gain access to any of the villages in that area. So we had both, and some of that was accessible by vehicle, by the Humvees, and the rest you'd have to use helicopters to air assault into areas to go see the locals or to go do an operation.
So you did both. You had patrols and such looking for the Taliban, I guess, and you also did civic action at almost the same time. Is that how it works? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the philosophy behind it is you focus on the populace, because that's what's most important, is trying to empower them and stand them up and get them the confidence they need in order to stand up on their own. And then, so by doing that and by building relationships with the locals, you in turn isolate the enemy or the insurgents. You deny them access to these areas that they've had safe haven before. If you're in the villages, they can't be in the villages. They've got to go out to the mountains, and then when they come back into the villages, they're trying to take the things that you've given the locals, from humanitarian aid to anything, and they don't want the locals to have it, because it was given to them by the coalition forces. So you try to divide and then isolate, so that you can go out and find them if that's what it requires. And if you can change them, then that's what you try to do too. I mean, there's radicals and there's fence sitters, and there's a whole dynamics behind that too. I mean, some of them do it because they can get paid back by whatever leadership is in that insurgency, and they can make more money fighting for 4 months than they can for harvesting crops for an entire year. So they look at it from an economical standpoint as well. So I mean, it's a slippery slope in some regards.
Can you describe maybe a typical day or typical week, if there is such a thing, for you and your company when you were in Patika?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I can give you some examples, but I mean, every day is different, and it all depends. I mean, and as you know, I mean, one operation can change drastically based off of events on the ground, or from something else coming up, or the reaction you may get. But what we tried to do, at least when we were in Gamal, was reach out. You can have a sphere of influence of where you can actually get out and maintain some type of relationship on a steady basis, and where they can feel comfortable coming to you if they need. And so for us in that area, it was about a 7-kilometer circle around where we were living at this little combat outpost. So our whole goal was to get out to those villages every week, go do a face-to-face with the tribal elders, and try to help them, not promise them anything, because we were very limited to our resources as well, but see what they needed and what we could help them do, and try to understand their hardships and go through them with them, and talk about of things. I mean, there's an information warfare just as much as anything else. I mean, what the bad guys are saying about us and what we're saying about them. So you want to get in there and physically show that you're not there to do harm to them, and that you want to help them and provide a better life for them and help them do it on their own. So that was probably our, a day-to-day routine. If we weren't out on some larger operation, was trying to go to these villages, link in with the tribal elders, establish some sort of grassroots governance, where they can start, speaking amongst themselves and communicating with the villages around there. And so we started something which you call a shura, which is basically a tribal meeting, and we'd get the village elders from each of those different tribes, and we'd link up at this district center that was built while we were over there. It was basically finished while we were over there, and we'd bring them in there. We had them. We started out leading them because they didn't really know what to think of bringing all these different tribal chiefs and mullahs together, and then we turned it over to them and said, you need to elect a president, or the chief basically of this shura council, and he's going to run the meetings, and we'll be here to facilitate anything you need, but this is on you, and we'd step out and let them talk amongst themselves, and they chose, one of the tribal elders from one of the villages that I guess had the most respect in that area. He had, fought back during the Mujahideen days, and so then he started running, and then our role was kind of to mentor him and help him, and you don't want to make it sound like he's a puppet. You just want to help empower him and guide them in the right direction, not with what U.S. policy is, but with what they want to try to get out of that area and how they're going to share the assistance and the aid to all the other villages, because just like we all want to protect our own families, they're going to look out for the well-being of their sub-tribe before they are of the others. So you have to really try to balance that out and say, if we bring you these things, it needs to be evenly distributed amongst all the different villages in the area, and it's not all going to go to your village, or if we get a well in this village so that y'all can have clean potable water, we need to get a well in every village. If we're going to try to build a school, it either needs to be centrally located, or we need to build small schools in every area, things like that. And so that was kind of what our main mission was. And with that, when people see you out doing that stuff, they're going to kind of get drawn to you, because they understand that you're there for that purpose. You're not there to try to, go cause violence and disrupt their way of life. And then you start getting overwhelmed with information. I mean, they start, just flooding you with information on where the bad guys are, where they're coming from, where weapons caches are, what they're trying to do, if they've treated people, poorly in certain areas, where these areas are, and it really, with a small group of guys, there's only so much you can do, and so you really have to pick and choose and prioritize what you want to go after, and what you just need to assume risk on, or what you need to try to empower them to do on their own. So, at the same time, while you're working with the villages, you're also trying to help stand up a national police. So we're out actively recruiting young males to join this police force, so that they can protect this district center, and they can be the face, for the Afghans, that they'll see when they go into the villages and say, we're here to help protect you and provide for you, and it's a link for them to their government, because you live in a remote part of the world, and you've got this government that claims they're responsible for you, but you've never felt any of the effects. Then why are you going to believe that, and why are you going to buy into it? So you try to do that link so that they can start understanding it, but you've got to do it from the bottom up. You can't do it from the top down, because it's so hard to get to those areas. And if you're flying them in on an American aircraft, what are they seeing? They're seeing an American aircraft with these Afghan officials on there. They're not seeing the Afghans doing it, and it's harder for them to relate to those individuals coming in that they may see once every 8 months to a year, and then they just go back to their daily life. So you're wearing a lot of different hats, I guess, is the best answer.
Yeah.
You go from a diplomat to a soldier to a humanitarian aid worker to a construction worker to whatever whatever you can imagine, you can probably get out there and do. So it is different, very different than some of the other conflicts we've been involved in.
Well, it's I think the goal of the government was to turn everything over to the Afghans, or most of it, by 2014 or so. So Atika's so far away, and there are mountains there, and it's right next to Pakistan. That's quite a challenge to have someone in charge and getting paid, I guess, by the Afghan government. I guess that's going to be a tough one. Did you run into any Taliban, or could you feel their effects while you were there? Or?
We did. I mean, we were in Gamal was it was a bad area when we got there, because U.S. forces had passed through there in the initial push into Afghanistan, and then that was basically the last time that we had any presence in that area. So when we showed up there, there were a lot of that was right when IEDs, the improvised explosive devices, started making their way into Afghanistan, and our company, First Sergeant, as well as platoon members from First Platoon, were all killed in a blast right when I showed up to that company. So it took a while for us to really get into Gamal and start to start to change that area. It was a main supply route and access road for insurgents coming across the border or coming from other parts of the country to kind of go to the four directions. If they wanted to go back to Pakistan, they could. If they wanted to head north, or if they wanted to head west or south towards Kandahar, they could. So we were there to try to overwatch and influence in that area and deny them the opportunity to move on those routes, because the routes are just dried up riverbeds, and there's not some of them that you can be driving along and then there's massive boulders right in the middle of them, and you're in a valley, so you're at a halt and you've got to go all the way back out and around to try to find a new route. So we were at one of the routes that existed, and so our one of our tasks was to overwatch that and to check people coming through that area and make them have to reroute how they were going to get there. But in other areas, I was in Burmel district, and that was right on the border. It was a fairly when we were there, it was a pretty dangerous spot. It was pretty thick with trees on the mountainsides, and it was easy areas for them to hide and come and go as they please, and it was difficult to get to. So we received a lot of indirect fire, rockets and mortars. Usually were daily in Burmel, and we got into some pretty bad ambushes and contacts along the border there too.
Is this the border of Pakistan?
The border with Pakistan. So there's no clearly defined border. So some tribes may claim that they don't really affiliate with either, because like the Waziris, which are historically a fighting type of tribe. They've always been in that area and always dealt with conflict. So it was tough to try to get in there and achieve the same effects that we achieved in Gamal, because you're more, you can just, sometimes you have that feeling, you just know that something bad's about to happen, and it makes it more difficult to get out there and shake hands and hand out humanitarian aid and do things like that. It really changes your mission to, finding the bad guys and getting them out of that area. So that was a bad area, and there were some other ones that were where Fob Tillman is. Was where one of my sister companies was. A TAC company was up there, and we ended up going up for some operations along there, because there were some caves in the mountains just north of Fob Tillman that were along the border as well. And so we went and stood up a little combat outpost up there, and same thing. It was, you always had that bad feeling that something was gonna happen. So you were always kind of expecting it. And back to the old days, Vietnam, and way before that, doing stand to, before the sunrise, and the same thing before the sunset. 100% security, just waiting to get hit or to pick up some radio traffic that they were moving in that area, trying to maneuver on you.
So you got pretty good at reading body language as well as.
Yeah, you did. One of the big indicators for security for me was if you go into an area and you've been there before, and then you go back and nobody's out and no kids are anywhere to be seen, then you knew something bad was about to happen. So you drew back, or you got on some high ground into a overwatch and advantageous position where you could have better effects in the event that something were to happen. So kids were kind of my security bubble. If I saw kids out, I knew we were probably safe to go in and try to meet with the locals. And if you saw houses, the compound doors shut and nobody out doing anything in the fields, and you knew something was probably about to go down. So you prepared for it, or you tried to maneuver on them before they could on you. So you did get pretty keen on that. You had to. It was instincts, and and also just experience, I guess, with lessons learned and understanding what was happening in other parts of the country at the same time. And the enemy share their tactics just like we do. So things that had worked well for them in other parts, in the Korengal Valley, for example, they were trying to use, down in Paktika. So you had to really stay alert and not ever get complacent. no matter how many times you'd been to an area and how safe it was.
There was an article in the newspaper, if my memory serves me right, about you in Mobile Press Register. Can you describe that, or do you remember what that covered?
It covered, I mean, similar stuff to what we're speaking of. There was a specific ambush that happened, I believe it was 19 June in 2007, and we were trying to do a route reconnaissance to the border to see where some of these routes were coming, and I was with Charlie Company. We had our company commander and one of our sister platoons who we worked really well with. And we were riding in the Humvees, so I mean, you know, already when you're in the mountains, you're riding in the valley, so anybody above you can look down and see where you're going and can have plenty of time to prepare for you. And we got to an area that the exact same thing happened. It was shut off, and you know, there was a boulder across the wadi, which is the dried riverbed, and so we turned around and we're coming back out to try to access the border from a different location. And as we were coming out of that spot, we were in a U-shaped ambush with anywhere from 40, probably 35 to 55 or 60 fighters, and so they tried to disable the lead vehicle and the trail vehicle so that they could basically lock you into a kill zone. And we were able to luckily maneuver out of there and dismount and then maneuver on them. And my sister platoon, Lieutenant Thornburg at the time, he and I were on the radio, and they were able to maneuver with their vehicles because they had heavy weapons, 50 cal and Mark 19s and 240 machine guns, and get to a position where they could see them and where they could engage them while we were able to dismount. And we took one casualty. We ended up getting him flown out, and he was all right, but a RPG hit his vehicle, and shrapnel had hit him. He was the gunner of the platoon sergeant's vehicle, which was in the trail because they were trying to take out that vehicle. So we called up the 9-line medevac and got him flown out of there, and we called in some fighter pilots, some F-16s to come help us out and drop some JDAMs on their exfil route. They were trying to get back across the border into the thick, more heavily wooded areas. So they came in, and we got them to do that, and then we had some, once they broke station, we had some Apache helicopter gunships come in as well to fly at lower altitude and see what they could see and if they could engage any of the fighters that were trying to get out of that area. And they also were there to escort us back out because our vehicles were pretty destroyed at that point. So we were kind of piecemeal moving back to the FOB, which was about 8 kilometers away to the west, away from the border, kind of in the open valley. So that was one of the first real bad ones. We had some small ones before that, but that was one of the first ones that kind of really opened your eyes to these people really are trying to kill you. So and luckily you rehearse that stuff all the time, and you refer back to your training, and biggest thing is to remain calm and take the tactical pause necessary to make the decisions and send your guys in the direction you need. So you can do what you need to do, and you can get everybody out of there and bring them home back safely.
Is there anything else about Afghanistan that you'd like to pass on, perhaps to future generations, before we move into what you did after that?
I mean, I guess our thing, we really try to focus on education of the next generation, because I mean, a lot of, and you can look at it from a lot of different angles, but the Afghans that are now in their mid 30s to 40s, I mean, they were they were growing up during the Soviet occupation days, and so they lacked that opportunity for education. So now all they know is either fighting or just harvesting their crops and praying to Allah that, you know, the floods won't come, or that they can have a, you know, successful and prosperous year so that they can provide for their family and potentially sell some of their produce in the local bazaar so that they can make some money to be able to do different things. So for the next generation, I think education is important, because it'll provide opportunity. You know, I mean, if these children get educated, then they can go out and they can go other parts of the world and understand good ideas and be able to bring them back to Afghanistan, or they'll stay in that area and they'll help influence that area to make it something more than it is right now. Because there's plenty of areas that could be much more civilized, I guess, or you know, they could push forward a little bit with just better opportunities for quality of life and for infrastructure and everything else. But I think that that's important for us to understand, and not to give up on that, is, you know, is educating the youth. And the problem is you know, and we're a very, you know, right now we need immediate result type of society. I mean, you know, we're not very patient, and for this to happen, I mean, it's going to take, you know, it's going to take a couple decades for those children to grow up and to get educated and to come back, or to, you know, to bring better ideas to their tribe or their sub-tribe, and how they can change Afghanistan. So, I mean, that's my personal opinion on it, but I think that's important. And then just, you know, never forget, it's all about the relationships. I mean, what you do over there and how you're remembered, what kind of footprints you leave on the elders and the kids and everybody that you work with, is how they're going to remember you, and how they're going to remember the U.S. soldiers when they were there. And, you know, I mean, they don't have a very good taste in their mouth from when the Soviets were there. So, you know, we certainly don't want to follow in that path. But I think that's important to understand and to embrace while you're there. And it takes a lot of patience, because, I mean, we can all be short-tempered at times, and I mean, it doesn't matter what your background is or what culture you come from. I mean, we're all humans at the end of the day, so we make mistakes, and we have to work through them and understand each other, and try to work together.
So you were in Afghanistan more than a year, if my memory's right, and
Mm-hmm.
then where were you ordered to then? What was your next?
Well, we went back to Italy. I took the scout platoon the last 3-4 months of the deployment. So we had a different mission as well. But when I came back, I was still the scout platoon leader for the battalion, and you know, and it was interesting for me, because at that point you see kind of how the big green machine works, because, you know, guys get promoted, and guys PCS, you know, they get a permanent change of station to a new assignment, or they move within the company, you know, to try to fill gaps in different areas where they need, you know, various non-commissioned officers and leadership. So, you know, we had this well-oiled machine that could basically run on its own to you were stripped down to nothing. You know, we had most of my junior non-commissioned officers either got promoted, or they had been in Italy for, you know, 3 or 4 years, and it was time for a new assignment. So, you know, they either re-enlisted to control their destiny to, you know, go to the 82nd Airborne or the 101st Airborne, or, you know, different units that they wanted to go to, or maybe it was something closer to home where they're from, or maybe they wanted to take a break from the fighting and they wanted to go be an instructor somewhere. So we kind of sent guys to the four winds. I had guys that went to the Ranger Training Brigade and became Ranger instructors. I had guys that went to the 82nd Airborne. I had some guys that got promoted. And so we were in that process of rebuilding. And so it was interesting for me, because, you know, you kind of go from this advanced level where everybody kind of knows what everyone else is thinking and doing, and you share the same pulse, to, you know, you got to start back from scratch. And so it was a good experience for me in the developmental realm, because I had to take a step back and understand that, you know, you got to be patient, because these younger guys, they're coming right out of basic training and airborne school, and, you know, they haven't done what y'all have done, and they don't understand, you know, what standard operating procedures for, you know, your dismounted movement, or your vehicle convoys, or anything about, you know, sniper weapon systems or anything like that, and you have to train them up on it. And so we were tasked with running a selection for the battalion scout platoon and running different guys through it, and then with the guidance of the battalion commander and battalion sergeant major, selecting the soldiers that we wanted to bring to the battalion scout. So that was kind of how I spent the next 6 months, was establishing a program, a little mini selection for physical fitness and for tactical and technical proficiency training. And then we ran guys through it and started to rebuild, basically, and that's how it works. I mean, you rebuild and you train up and then you go again. So so that's what we were training to do, was get those guys ready to go back a year later to Afghanistan. So it was busy. When we had a little bit of downtime, we got back and got to come back to the States and have some good leave with family and friends, and then went back over there and started doing that. But it was a good experience. It's a rewarding experience, especially when you hand it off and you're handing off to a good product to somebody and saying, hey, I'm confident in these guys and they're going to serve you well, and you're going to be very proud of them, and then following up on it and seeing how it went and getting good feedback, and that's important. And the funny thing is with young soldiers, I guess, and it's the real interesting thing, is you can there's everybody still, you really can influence and develop them, and it's what you mold them into. So if you've got good non-commissioned officers and good leadership, good officers at the top, then you can really instill the values that are necessary to go fight and achieve effects in a place like Afghanistan, instead of just letting them kind of just do what they want and miss that discipline and that understanding of they're more than just a Joe on security. I mean, they've got to be able to think, they got to be able to react, and they got to add something to the group. I mean, that's what makes them valuable. And and you put that on them, and you give them that responsibility and help them understand and educate them, and it can be a very rewarding process for them and for you, because you can see where they start and where they finish, and how they develop into a non-commissioned officer, and then how they pass that on to the next group of privates that come in. And so you want to try to do that in the military, because that's what's going to continue to make our military so great, and not just look at them as okay, well, I've got these guys, let's go out and do it. I mean, you want to make it a rewarding experience for everybody, and the time you spend away from your family and friends, make it worthwhile. Don't make it a miserable deployment where you're counting down the days to get home because you hate being over there so much. I mean, put a different twist on it. Everybody's suffering hardships and hates being away from their loved ones, but you're with the people you're with, and you can learn a lot from each other, and you can invest a lot in each other, and you can come back and when you look back on it 30 years from now, say that was a good experience, and I feel like we did good things while we were over there, good and noble things.
So after that, you came back you were assigned stateside, and that's where you are now?
I went to the Maneuver Captain's Career Course at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that's a 6-month program for all the captains that you go to for infantry is what it was, and it was great, because a lot of those guys I hadn't seen since when I was a second lieutenant in the infantry officer basic course. So it's kind of a reunion, and it's funny because no matter what rank you are or how old you get, you still act like a bunch of young lieutenants when you see each other again, and start hounding each other for things you remembered, or learning from each other too, with all the different experiences where guys had gone. And so that was a great course. I mean, it was a work hard, play hard course. You really learned a lot with just the higher levels, and with understanding kind of the strategic picture of what we're trying to achieve, as well as you want to be the tactical experts of what you're doing, and understand how you fall into the picture at a battalion level, and what you can do at a company level to really influence that. So it was great. It was a good 6 months, and got me closer to home and to my now wife, and all of our friends back in the States that I'd kind of had a hard time keeping up with while I was over in Italy. So I really enjoyed that time too.
Okay. Well, I guess that concludes it, unless you have anything more to add. I think you've been quite comprehensive in your
No, I mean,
coverage. And
if y'all,
such.
yeah, any questions? Otherwise, I'm good to go.
I can't think. I think you've done a great job. But go
What
ahead.
will you do when you go back to Afghanistan in December or after Christmas?
I mean, more of the same. I mean, we'll just try to, we'll try to work with the locals and just, the new thing is village stability operations, which is basically what I consider what we were doing, and now it's, just got a new name on it, but it's really helping at that grassroots level with the locals and getting them what they need and helping them stand up on their own. I mean, the whole goal is for you to, the token phrase we use is to work yourself out of a job, which means that they're standing up for themselves and doing everything on their own, from infrastructure to governance to security, to trying to revamp their economy and open it up with trade and commerce. And with that, you've got to have the roads and the access for them to be able to get to different areas so that they can do that. So it's interesting to see that. Kind of can let you think back when when our nation was first founded and how we had to do that on our own as well, and figured out how we're going to link the different towns on the East Coast together, and how you're going to communicate and start to thrive as a nation. But they've got to do it at the very basic core sub-tribe levels, and then work up to their tribes and their districts, and then their provinces, and then the provinces is what ties them to Kabul and to the government, to President Karzai. So without the opportunity to get to those areas, then they're never going to feel those effects. So we've really, and security's got to come first is the big thing. I mean, you can't get somewhere if if you're going to get killed or captured or blown up in the process. So
Did you do a lot of training of Afghan troops?
we did. That was that was a thing that was real rewarding for us, was watching them kind of grow and develop from just a hodgepodge group of probably teenagers and in their young 20s into a more mature, disciplined fighting force. And we'd stay with them a good bit, and we'd give them classes on tactics and on hygiene. I mean, hygiene's a big thing that they don't understand, and there's so many things that can happen if you don't take care of yourself, and how it can spread throughout a group. And then we had them give us classes too. That way you could empower them. Give us some cultural classes on this area. Give us some classes on Islam so that we can better understand, what you believe, and that opened up a lot of different doors, because that really related to them and made them understand we weren't trying to push Christianity on them by any means, or any other religion, but we were just there to work alongside them. And we ended up giving some solar panels and some paint and new rugs for their mosques, and Qurans for their mullahs, so that they could they could understand everything that the Taliban or Al Qaeda insurgents were saying, that we were there to to destroy Islam, wasn't true. Because here we are giving you things for your mosque, and we're not allowed to go inside of them, and we weren't going to go inside of them, but we're gonna support your beliefs and your faith, just as we ask you to support ours, and we're not going to push them on you at all. And that had some serious positive effects as well. Gave them these loudspeakers that were hooked up to solar panels so that they could do their call to prayer, and they absolutely loved it. So and a lot of it's on the ground too. There's not a doctrine for it. You're learning from things you're seeing, with your own eyes while you're there, and saying, hey, this would be a good idea, or this is something we should try different. It's not really working, and then you go with it. My mom sent us a one of those little Kodak camera printers that we would take out in the Humvee, and we had a little AC adapter that we'd hook up, and we could take pictures of some of the locals and then print them out and go hand them to them, and they just thought that was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. They wanted like family portraits and all kinds of stuff, because you could do it right there and give it back to them, and getting them ID cards to kind of validate who they are and what sub-tribe they come from, and what where they fall into the bigger picture. And so they'd show up, and they loved having their little ID cards to pull out and show you that they were part of Afghanistan and part of the Paktika province. So just little things like that. I mean, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what works for you on the ground, and what works for me may not work for the next guy in a different area, because the dynamics of personality and leadership and how you relate to them and to one another. So it's what makes it interesting and keeps it challenging, I guess.
Did you have to deal a lot with tribal rivalries?
There were some conflicts, and the way you have to look at them is a lot of time, they'll use the punchline Taliban, so they'll say, this group over here is Taliban, but it's really because they've had this tribal dispute for the last 15 years over, something from, it could be as easy as land, like this sub-tribe has claimed that this land is, belongs to them, and the other sub-tribe claims it belongs to them, and so you have to go out there and, you learn a lot about conflict resolution and negotiation tactics and how you're going to work through it, and most of the time it's just bringing them to the table together and having them sit down and talk through it, just like, two grown men, instead of going back to your little sub-tribe, which in this instance could be considered, your own little gang and this own little gang, and then sit there and try to attack one another, or get the the coalition to attack them because you're painting them out to be something they're not. So you have to be careful with that, because you can't just jump on it and say, oh, okay, the bad guys are over there, let's go get them. It takes a common sense check to understand that's probably not what it is. Let's look into it and do a little bit of research here, and go talk to these guys, and then let's see what we can do to resolve it. And that was usually the best answer. Sometimes they took it in their own hands, and you don't want to get involved with that either, because it could put your guys' lives in danger. And then after that it's settled, you can go in there and try to understand what in the world was going on. But they have a whole tribal structure of disciplining and of laws. Their own tribal laws in those areas. So it's very fragile to try to bring in government rules and laws that when they consider what they've been doing for the last generation to be working, even though they don't know something better exists, but they don't want you to come in and tell them that their laws are wrong and they need to follow these laws, because they're going to look at you and think you're crazy. So
was it really difficult not being able to cross the border into Pakistan to follow up?
It's frustrating. It certainly is. What the most you could do is try to call call your hire, and then get them to call across the border to Pakistan, and try to have their army that is in some of those areas do stuff. But when over my 16 months, I never did any face-to-face with any Pakistani military. I know that some units did, and some of our companies did, but there are not a lot of Pakistani checkpoints along the areas where we were. I think there was maybe one every 10 miles or so, and you're talking about rolling mountainous terrain, and they're just this little hut sitting on the side of a mountain. What can they really control, especially in the thicker areas, the more dense wooded areas? You can only see for maybe 150 meters in all directions, so somebody could just walk right around you and continue on. So
did you find that most of the people you engaged with in fights, were they foreign to the area, or were there locals?
It depends where you were and what, in the South, from what I understand, it's very different, because you've got the opium down there, and so that's their livelihood. So you do have a lot of fighters down there. And in the North, they've got a lot of the I guess it'd be like foresters almost, the guys that are going out chopping down the trees and taking the wood over to Pakistan, and they were thinking they were going to get taxed for the wood, so then they're going to side with the insurgency instead of their government and the coalition forces. And we saw different foreign fighters. We saw, we had guys identified that were from, pockets in Waziristan, either in Afghanistan or Pakistan. So it just depends. But it's the prime area for foreign fighters to go if they want an opportunity to shoot at, Western soldiers. So that's, which I'd much rather them do it there than try to do it on our home soil. So, you did see a lot of foreign fighters over there.
Okay. Well, it's been great having you and seeing
Yeah,
you
thank
again.
you. Absolutely. Good to see you
Appreciate
as
your
well.
contribution,
Uh-huh.
and it's a privilege to be with you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you all for having us.